Greeting, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel of the Continuing Church of God. Today I want to talk about the 6 years of the Continuing Church of God and basically scriptures that Philadelphians understand that many others seem to miss. On December 28th, 2012, on the Roman calendar, basically what happened was it was time to leave our prior church organization because certain things were not going right. There were integrity issues. The integrity issues that this organization repeatedly said they would correct, things they would fix, mistakes that they were sending out to their people. But then they basically told me on the 28th they aren't going to fix anything, they're not going to keep their promises, etc. So I concluded that that was not the organization that could possibly be Philadelphian. And so we left. And on that particular date, we declared or made an announcement or declaration that we would form the Continuing Church of God. And we were formed as what's called a corporation sole, which basically means we don't have to deal with the governmental issues and certain bureaucracies that other organizations did. We didn't file ourselves as a 501c3 because we didn't want to have restrictions from the government, and we took care of that as well. Anyway, as you've been watching our sermons throughout the years, you realize that we've claimed that we best represent the Philadelphian remnant in the 21st century during this Laodicean time. Have we been doing what the Bible says? And is it misunderstandings of scriptures that basically keep Laodiceans instead of them becoming Philadelphian? And is there any similarities in how we started versus the old Radio Church of God? What have we done in the last 6 years? Have we had proclamation success? What about size, growth? Does that show anything? And have we properly restored doctrine and cleared up other matters? So those are some things we're going to go through. Now, since this is the 6th year, basically I want to talk about something the old Worldwide Church of God taught about, the number 6. And they had a book called Symbols of the Bible. In the booklet it said that the elect were the Philadelphia church, but that 6 was man's number, and that 666 was the number of the beast, and 7 was completion. And we know that in Revelation 13, verse 18, we see 666 being the number of the beast. Because it turns out, of course, that God has 7 churches, and the 6th one happens to be Philadelphia. Now, we've done some things different in the Continuing Church of God. Some of our critics have improperly claimed that we idolized the late Herbert W. Armstrong, or we won't change anything, we can't come up with the ideas, do anything different than he had done. And that's simply not the case. Well, we respect the fact that God used Herbert W. Armstrong to restore a variety of truths to the Church of God that had been lost throughout the ages. This book, and not the writings of the late Herbert W. Armstrong, as the standard and the criteria. And there were a few things in the old Radio/Worldwide Church of God that were not being done that I think needed to be done. For example, you don't have to go there. In Deuteronomy 31, verses 10 through 12, it says at the end of every 7 years, at the Feast of Tabernacles, you were supposed to gather the people together and hear all the words of the law. What do you mean? How do you hear all the words of the law? Well, that would mean you would go through the book of Deuteronomy every 7 years. Now, I had been in the Worldwide Church of God for several decades, and they had never done that. I say a couple of decades. I'm trying to get my numbers straight here because when things happen, and I'd never seen that done. Now, the organization that I went to after, when there was the apostasy of the Worldwide Church of God, they didn't do it either. But the first opportunity that I had, the first time I was asked to give sermons at the Feast of Tabernacles, and I'd been given sermonettes in the past, but the first time I was given the opportunity to do sermons at the Feast of Tabernacles, I put together 2 sermons, and one of them was to go through the book of the law. So I did what I could in the time I had, and I went through very quickly pretty much the book of Deuteronomy, but not every single word. And I thought about this, and then it turns out, because we left our prior organization in December 2012, the next Feast of Tabernacles would be the year 2013, and that actually would be time again, it's the end of 7 years, to do this again. Now this particular time, not having a restriction that I could only speak once or twice, I covered the entire book of Deuteronomy during that Feast of Tabernacles, consistent with what the Bible says. And some people will say, okay, so what? Anybody could have done that, and that's, I suppose anybody could have, but we did do that. So we need to do what God says. Now this is not an affront to the memory, if you will, of the late Herbert Hubbard Armstrong, but there was something in Scripture that I think he should have done that he didn't do. And there's another point that I'd like to also cover that we've done. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 through 20, Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations, etc., etc. Teaching, verse 20, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the year, age. Well, this idea about teaching all things Jesus commanded was not something that was intentionally done when I attended Catholic Church, Protestant Church, or any Church of God group. Now, don't get me wrong. To some degree, the Catholics and Protestants and various Church of God groups covered some of the words that Jesus did. And perhaps, to some degree, somewhere or the other, they covered all the words that Jesus said. But if they did, I was not aware of it, at least not in church services. Growing up Roman Catholic, we attend Mass, they have a particular liturgy, and I attended for years, and they did not intentionally try to go through every word that Jesus commanded in the Catholic Mass. I attended the Protestant church for a few years, and they quoted Jesus from time to time, or probably often, I suppose. But they also didn't make an intentional effort to go through this way. Furthermore, when I was part of the Worldwide Church of God, and then a couple of break-off groups from there later, nobody intentionally covered every single word that Jesus did. And what we did, however, in the 6 years since the formation of the Continuing Church of God, we did sermons covering every word that Jesus said, but not just that, but every word of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so those are 4 gospel accounts, plus the words of Jesus that were recorded in Acts, Corinthians, and book of Revelation. So we intentionally covered everything. And somebody would say, so what? Anybody could do that. And that's true. But I remember once I was speaking to, actually I'll say his name, Steve Dupuy, about this, and I said, anybody could have done that. And he says, no. I said, well, yes, they could. Anybody could have. And he said, no. Well, basically no, because he didn't think God had put it on their hearts to do it, but he did on mine. And this is something that we've done. And is there anything wrong with covering every word that Jesus spoke? No, because that's part of the commission that the church is supposed to do. And so we didn't stick with tradition if it was in violation of Scripture. Again, traditionally, the Church of God hadn't done that. In addition to myself doing it, when I was in Africa last year, I spoke to leaders from Africa and Europe and said, make sure you do the same thing. I don't intend to be the only one in the Continuing Church of God who teaches every word that Jesus commanded. But this is something that we're doing. Now, when my wife and I decided we had to separate from our prior organization, we had to walk out on faith. We could have possibly lost our business and livelihood, as running the Continuing Church of God takes a tremendous amount of time. We considered the cost, and we stepped out on faith. Unlike many of the organizations, as a matter of fact, all the Church of God organizations actually larger than the Continuing Church of God, that had origins from the old Worldwide Church of God, they all had basically a bunch of ministers and their basic plan together, how they were going to get started and have all kinds of money and all this kind of stuff. We didn't do that. We didn't do it at all. We didn't have anybody lined up. We didn't have any plans to do that. So I comment on that. Also, I'll also comment that we're clearly not ministering for a paycheck, because we don't take a paycheck, neither my wife nor I, from the Continuing Church of God. And so we're not hirelings. Jesus warned about hirelings in John 10, verse 11 through 13. And I'm not saying everybody else who's not with us is necessarily a hireling, but I'm just saying that false accusations that everybody in the Church of God, all the leaders, it's about money or some nonsense like that, is simply not true. In the Continuing Church of God, Again, I still don't take a salary, and after these 6 years, doesn't mean I never could, but we don't. Now, why? Well, there's a couple different reasons. Let's go through the book of Acts for just a moment. I'm going to Acts chapter 20, verse 32. Actually, let's start with verse 33. I have coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. This is what Paul is saying, and I'm saying the same thing to you. Yes, you yourselves know that with these hands I provide for my necessities and for those who are with me, and mine, keeping our business going. I have shown you in every way by laboring like this that you must support the weak. So Paul wrote, and remember the words of the Lord Jesus said, it's more blessed to give than receive. Now, supporting the weak, and as also in Galatians 2:20, supporting the poor, is something that Christians, leaders, are supposed to do. And yes, as I said, I know biblically I'm entitled to salary. You can look it up in 1 Corinthians 9:14. But the reason we don't has to do with supporting the weak, as well as something it says in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 26. I'm going to read it. You don't have to go there. This is the Apostle Paul, and he wrote, because of the present distress, it's good for a man to remain as he is. Now, when Paul wrote this, he was actually talking about marital status. Well, my marital status is the same as it's been for over 37 years. Of course, I've been married then, it hasn't changed. But I see present distress in places such as Africa, and because of that, haven't taken a salary. Now, because we haven't taken a salary, we've had funds to send to the poor, the hungry in Africa, as well as to fund what we could call missionary trips to Africa and other places. Now, despite what we've done, various ones complain about us. They say all kinds of things about us. Now, it says in Romans 1, verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And we're seeing this, and we've seen this during the 6 years since the formation of the declaration of the formation of the Continuing Church of God. As soon as we started, false statements were released about me personally. Denials of facts were made. Now, if people would have been told the truth, more who had the love of the truth would have supported us. Now, some, like people in New Zealand, had suspected that our prior organization had integrity problems. And when they read what happened, they realized it rang true. And someone else in New Zealand had a couple of dreams. A couple were impacted by a dream. We'll get to that later. And in time, scattered people came with us. But most Christians didn't come to us for many reasons, including falsehoods about me and the Continuing Church of God. I'd like to read 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. Yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, but evil men and impostors will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. And we've seen that, including for people who are supposed to be Church of God leaders, but also anti-Church of God leaders. They've called me a liar and false repeatedly, not because they can cite any lies I've made or any false prophecies or something, but they don't like how I interpret something, or they just don't like the fact I exist, as far as I can tell. And people say it often enough, so they tend to think it's common, so it must be true that these people say this. But when Jesus is around, they said in John 9:24, it's recorded, we know this man is a sinner. Now, Jesus didn't sin, but they commonly said, oh yeah, he must, because he was dealing with tax collectors and he was doing this, and he doesn't keep the Sabbath the way the Pharisees say. But he wasn't a sinner. But it was taught so much that people believed it. In John 15, in verse 18, you don't have to go there, but it says, the world hates you. No, it hated me before it hated you. And if you were the world will love its own. Servant's not greater than master. If they persecute me, Jesus said, they're going to persecute you. And then he says, various things that happened. They hated both him and the Father, but this happened that the word might be fulfilled, which was written in their law. They hated me without a cause. And I and the Continuing Church of God have often been hated without a proper cause. I'd like to read something Jesus said. This is from Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for there is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So being wrongly persecuted means you can be subject to God's blessings. But somebody contacted us, they did not want to become part of it because they read bad things about us on the internet, which were not true. But the attitude is, so many bad things are written, no, we don't want to be associated with that. I'll throw up something else that I saw probably about a week ago. There was this one anti-Church of God site. They were trying to condemn me. They put up something affected. Prophets don't use words like maybe or might or possibly. Well, actually, if a prophet's not directly prophesying, and sometimes even when they are, they might use those words. But most of the time when prophets speak, they're not prophesying. You look at the prophets in the Old Testament, some of these prophets wrote, 2, 3, 4 pages? As far as we know, they didn't do any other prophesying. So the rest of their life, every time they said they were speaking, they weren't necessarily prophesying for God. Now the Old Testament actually shows that prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel use the word perhaps. The psalmists Ezekiel, Hosea, Amos, Habakkuk, Zechariah, Malachi, and Paul used the word might. And Paul actually used the word once perceive. He perceived something, but he made a prediction and it turned out to be an error. You can read about that in Acts 27. It's possible I could be perhaps the most improperly maligned Church of God leader today. Lies from the former group I was in are still widely accepted. Somebody who was once in that told me something a couple of months ago. I was just shocked that the people were saying about me just were not true. And of course, the lies, the innuendos and false information about me and misreporting from the anti-Church of God types on the internet, that seems to increase every day. But Jesus said that would happen to prophets. Jesus said he expected his church to have prophets after he was resurrected, or he wouldn't have written, so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, interestingly, that's a prophecy for now. Now, Herbert Armstrong actually stated it was his view that the Bible was mainly written for the Philadelphian remnant, the Philadelphian era, the church, if you will. So let me read what he wrote. This is from the sermon called Mission Philadelphia Church Era. It was given on December 17, 1983. He said in the sermon, "It has been seeming more and more to me as years go by that the Bible was written primarily for the Philadelphia era of the church. It's not been understood previously till now." Now, there were no ordained prophets during the time of Herbert Armstrong. Now, presuming there's some truth in what he said, then the statement from Jesus about prophets would be related to things now. And we'll get to that later. Now, there are Laodiceans who point to some other statements that Herbert Armstrong said that there were no prophets now and that there weren't any after the book of Revelation was written. However, we need to look at the Bible. The New Testament clearly supports the view that there would be prophets after it was written. And you can see that, for example, in Acts 2. And I'll get to that later. Furthermore, I'd like to read something that was put out by the Church of God in Smyrna. This is in the 2nd century. The Church of God in Smyrna put out something called the Martyrdom of Polycarp. And this is what it says. Martyrdom of Polycarp 16:2. Now this is not part of the Bible. This is after the Scripture. It says, "In the number of these was this man, the glorious martyr Polycarp, who was found an apostolic and prophetic teacher in our time, a bishop or pastor of the Holy Church, which is in Smyrna. For every word which he uttered from his mouth was accomplished and will be accomplished." So it appears that prophet was one of Polycarp's roles. And he was a traveling prophet, so maybe he's a prophetic evangelist, is what I would say. Now, interestingly, Herbert Armstrong endorsed Polycarp as a Church of God leader. For example, this is from the Good News magazine of December 1981. It's significant after his release John trained Polycarp, elder of Smyrna, the city near Ephesus in the province of Asia. Polycarp presided over the Church of God for half a century after John's death. Polycarp stood boldly for the truth, while many fell away and began to have fellowship with the bishops of Rome. He says Polycarp wrote many letters to congregations and individuals, but all these have perished except for one of them. Now, furthermore, there's another person who is considered to be a prophet, and this is somebody called Melito of Sardis. And Herbert Armstrong wrote an article, or a booklet actually, Plain Truth About Easter, and he listed Melito as one of the true Christian leaders. And so we've got two Christian leaders that Herbert Armstrong said were Christian, that literature says were prophets or did some prophesying after the book of Revelation came out. Furthermore, in the old Ambassador College Bible Correspondence course of 1965, talking about the Paulician Church, which the Radio Church of God taught was part of the True Church of God, it says, four of their greatest leaders, the Paulicians, called apostles and prophets. So the idea that there could not have been prophets after the New Testament was written is simply not true. Now, Herbert Armstrong, in my opinion, made the anti-prophet statement because he was tired of people coming up trying to think they were some kind of a prophet on their own. And so sometimes Herbert Armstrong had a tendency to overreact. And I did speak to his longtime aide, Aaron Dean, about this a little while back, and he concurred with me that no, Herbert Armstrong didn't really mean there could be no prophets. Okay? Even though I realize people can find a statement on the internet that that's what he said. But again, this is the criteria, not an off-the-cuff remark or statement from Herbert Armstrong. And speaking of this book, let's actually read what it says in Acts chapter 2, verse 17 through 18. I'll give you a moment to get there. Peter is speaking here, and he says, Acts 2:17, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, says God." So it's the last days. This is not the time prior to the end of the book of Revelation. This is afterwards. "I will pour out my spirit on your flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy." Now, I realize there was a fulfillment of this during Peter's time, but it is not the only fulfillment. "Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men shall dream dreams. And on my men servants and on my maidservants I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they shall prophesy." So clearly the New Testament is teaching that there'll be prophets in the end times. And of course, Herbert Armstrong believed that the two witnesses were prophets and they would be there. Of course, some will say, well, not so fast. If you think you're some kind of a prophet, just saying one doesn't make it so. And that's true. And we have a sermon about true prophets you can find at the Continuing COG channel. And we have an article at the cogwriter.com website called How to Determine if Someone's a Prophet of God that I would recommend that you read. But Laodiceans and others often won't accept God's prophets. According to former Global Church of God board member Norman Edwards, he says the reason they do this is basically because the pride gets in their way. And, Jesus warned the Philadelphians in Revelation 3:11, don't let any man take your crown. Yet some people think that they're better off not being part of a church organization, whether there's a minister in charge or an evangelist or prophetic evangelist, such as the Continuing Church of God or whatever. What people have done, however, is people who don't want to accept the kind of thing have overlooked what the Bible says in Ephesians chapter 4. Now, I am going to get to more specific about what's been going on in the last 6 years in the Continuing Church of God, but I want to do this as a kind of a background before I get into this. Ephesians 4 verse 11 says, "And he," that's God himself, "gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors in teaching, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for edifying the body of Christ, until we come to the unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure and stature of the fullness of Christ." Okay, well, that's not happening. We're not going to be perfect, and the unity of faith does not happen until after Jesus returns. Okay, which means that there are to be apostles, and there can be apostles, there can be prophets, etc., up through when Jesus returns. So this is clearly telling us that no, the prophetic office was not finished by this time or by the time the book of Revelation was written. Now, part of the reason given, verse 14, is that we should no longer be children tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, in cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. But speaking the truth in love, may grow up in all things into him who is the head, Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share. Every part is supposed to do its share, causes the growth of the body for the edifying itself of love. Now, what happened was that some of the Laodiceans, particularly on the independent side, have said, oh no. And this is where pride is getting in the way. What they basically said is, look, my minister apostatized, or 3 or 4 ministers I knew apostatized, or evangelists I knew apostatized with the split of the old worldwide Church of God. I didn't follow them. Therefore, I do not have to listen to any minister. Therefore, I'm fine to be independent and on my own. But that's an error. You're letting somebody take your crown. You need to be edifying the body in love for the growth of the body and to support getting the gospel out. But people have rationalized this away. Laodiceans and others don't think the scripture means what it says. They think because their own experiences that trumps the Bible, and it does not. Look, I was in the old worldwide Church of God. I saw ministers apostatize. I saw evangelists apostatize. I saw leaders who I thought were really strong in the faith apostatize. Okay? But that didn't mean God didn't have a plan. You're not supposed to believe what I say just because I say it. Now, I don't intend to lie to you, and as far as I know, I never have. Okay? But if someone's telling you something contrary to Scripture, you're not supposed to listen, whether it's me or, like Paul said, even if an angel comes down from heaven, they preach a false gospel, you don't follow them. Okay? God allowed apostasy to set in the worldwide Church of God. I think he did this for lots of different reasons. He allowed it, partially to separate the Laodiceans from the Philadelphians. But what happened is a lot of people gave up on that idea. Now some just went into the bigger organizations and they were more comfortable with. Others decided, they thought it was safer to be by themselves. Kind of reminds me of the people who took Jesus tells a parable of the talents, and one person takes it and wraps it all up because he doesn't trust anybody or anything else, and Jesus condemns him for that. Now, you don't have to go there, but in Matthew 10, verses 22 to 23, Jesus said, you're going to be hated by all men, all for my sake, but he who endures the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one city, go to another, for you're not going to go through all the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Well, for those who are more on the independent side, I'm going to tell you that you can go from one persecuting minister, okay, when they're teaching falsehoods, obviously it's sort of like persecuting because they'll persecute you verbally for your beliefs. You're not just supposed to say, okay, I'm not going to do anything. No, you go from one to the other. So you leave a false ministry and support the true ministry. Now, of course, you might think, okay, the ministry you're part of now is not false. And it's true, you could be part of a Laodicean or Sardis church. But Jesus warned the Philadelphians, don't let anyone take your crown. And he warned those who were not Philadelphians that they were losing truth and that they thought they were fine the way they are and that they needed to change. The other thing, though, about going from one area to the other kind of reminds me what happened with us in Africa. Now, I know full well people can be hurt emotionally, and what happened with the breakup of the old worldwide Church of God and some of the other splits, etc., such, have done that. Okay? But we're not supposed to just rely on our own understanding. We're supposed to do it God's way and support the Philadelphia work. Now, let me comment about something. The continuing Church of God has been cheated by various ones at different times in at least 3 African countries. So should we have given up on Africa? I was talking to somebody who's in charge of one of the smaller Laodicean Church of God groups. And after he got cheated the second time in Africa, he told me, I'm never going to send any money there again. Because he said, I learned my lesson, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it. Remember, Jesus said, they persecute you in one city, go to another. You won't get to all the cities of Israel before he returns, before the Son of Man comes. Well, yes, we were cheated from time to time. But let's talk about the first time we were cheated. First time we were cheated was somebody, we didn't send much, so we didn't lose much. But because of him, we ended up getting some people in another country. This person was in Kenya, but we ended up getting people from Tanzania because of this. And because of this, ultimately, it led to others finding out that we existed, which ended up eventually helping us have growth in Africa. Now, according to the book of Acts, Philippians, Corinthians, 2 Peter, Christians can be cheated. And of course, Joshua and the children of Israel fell for lies for a time themselves. You can read about it in Joshua 9. But as far as us, we didn't say, okay, well, because there's some phony, poor, hungry people in Africa, then everybody in Africa is poor, who's poor and hungry, we shouldn't help. Okay? We didn't just give up. But a lot of people don't want to put up with it. You don't have to go there, but it says in 1 Peter 3, starting verse 14, and if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you're blessed. And going down to verse 17, it says, for it's better if it's the will of God to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. So yeah, we suffered emotionally and financially when some deceived us. Yet, we were ultimately blessed with massive growth in Africa. And I'm going to read Galatians 6:10. You don't have to go there. It says, therefore, as you have the opportunity, let us do good to all, especially those who are the household of faith. It doesn't say, don't do good to people in Africa or Asia. A couple of places we've helped people with the hungry and the poor, because other people there may cheat you or try to cheat you. No, it says, let's do good to all, especially those who are the household of faith. And yes, I realize that there are false brethren. And so sometimes that has happened. But you're not supposed to give up because that happened, and we didn't do it. Ecclesiastes 11:6 is a scripture that I've always kept to heart. Although I don't have it memorized verbatim. It says, in the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand, for you don't know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both will be good. And, the Apostle Paul had perils amongst false brethren, but that didn't stop him from going forth and doing the work. So we work in one part of the world, and work in another part of the world, and see how it works. We don't know how or when God is going to have people respond. But he has. Recently, somebody that I've been working with for over 6 years, that group decided to come with us. And I hadn't thought that was going to happen. And then other things have happened much faster. Now, non-believers and Laodiceans often don't understand how it works, or God works. On the one hand, you got some people who claim that all churches of God are the same, and what you need is some kind of spiritual miracle or something divine that shows that you're different than anybody else. So what happens when God does do that? Well, they don't necessarily accept that, because one of the things people don't like is the fact that God can intervene through things such as dreams. It reminds me once, in our prior organization, I was talking to our regional pastor, who was also on the board of directors or something, and the council of elders, so he had a few important roles there. And we were talking about spiritual gifts once, and I more or less said, what happens if a spiritual gift comes that isn't what people were expecting? Now, at the time, the head of that church kept hoping he was going to get healed of something, and so that was a spiritual thing, gift he wanted. And I said, what if it's something different? What if it's something that's not not normal, something people were not expecting. And he didn't really give me an answer. I gave him, but at least I got him to think about it. Now, although some of the prophets in the Hebrew Scriptures did miracles, and some of the apostles in the Greek Scriptures are also prophets, no one who is considered a prophet and not apostle is shown as doing dramatic miracles. You can read about that in John 10:41. But sometimes God does things more quietly, like he did with a still small voice in 1 Kings 19:12. Dreams remind me of that still small voice. And although Elijah accepted that God worked that way, most of the Laodiceans don't seem to do that. Now, the Bible clearly records that God uses dreams to give messages. Now, by the way, my notes for this sermon are at the COGwriter.com website, and you can read it. It's called COG 6 Years in Scripture's Laodiceans Miss. We also have an article about dreams. We can go into more depth than I'm going to go into today. But I do want to go through a few things with the dreams, because that's going to tie in with what's been going on in the CCOG in the last 6 years. I'm going to read Numbers chapter 12, verse 6. Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him in a vision. I will speak to him in a dream. So that's what the Bible says. Now, many don't want to hear about dreams. They don't want to believe the Bible says this. And they fail to realize that how God has used dreams related to his Philadelphia work. I read from Acts chapter 2 already, so I'm not going to repeat it. But dreams were prophesied to be in the last days. And Herbert Armstrong claimed that his wife Loma had a dream in the 20th century from God that preceded the start of the old radio Church of God. And Herbert Armstrong wrote, within 30 or 60 days after our marriage, God spoke to my wife in what might have been an intense, unusual dream or a vision. But it was years later before we came to realize that this really was a message from God. Now, Herbert Armstrong was married in 1917. And basically, in this dream, they were told they were going to have a work to do. There were bright lights in the dream that seemed to have something to do with the work. And it returned, and it vanished, and it returned. So there was a dream given to a woman in the 20th century that preceded the start of the old radio Church of God that Herbert Armstrong led. And he believes that the radio Church of God represented the Philadelphia era of the church, and they were doing the Philadelphian work. Now, that's a work that is not finished. And you question that, read Matthew 24, 14, and 15. Now, Herbert Armstrong claimed that God gave this particular dream, and that this was how God intervened before he was going to have this particular era begin. And before Herbert Armstrong died, I want to read what he wrote in his last letter. This is dated the January 10th, 1986, and I actually remember getting the letter and reading it a couple days afterwards. We didn't live very far from Pasadena at that time. This is where the letter came from. He wrote, "The greatest work lies ahead. Never before in the history of the church has it been possible to reap so great a harvest. It's only been made possible through modern technology, beginning with the printing press, radio, and television. Each of you must commit yourself to supporting God's work. God's work must push ahead as never before. God is opening up new doors in television." Now, consider that Herbert Armstrong did not teach the second part of his wife's dream was fulfilled, and that he also said that a greater work was going to happen after his death. Well, Matthew 24:14 has not yet been fulfilled, and that's the work we in the Continuing Church of God are leading. Now, I'd like to go to the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 2. I'm going to read 2 verses there, so you might want to go there. Hebrews 2, verse 1. "Therefore, we must give the more earnest heed to the things which we've heard, lest we drift away." Verse 4. "God also bearing witness both with signs and wonders, with various miracles and gifts of the Holy Spirit, according to his will." Now, it used to be that people, part of the old worldwide Church of God, generally believed that the dream that Loma Armstrong had prior to the formation of the radio Church of God was a sign from God. Yet that dream had a couple different parts, and the final part was not fulfilled when her husband, Herbert W. Armstrong, was alive. And if Philadelphian Christians, therefore, should have looked for a future fulfillment. Instead, those who are Laodiceans, they've drifted away from that. And furthermore, they tend to discount all dreams. Yet it was the written position of the Worldwide Church of God during the time of Herbert Armstrong, as well as right afterwards, because I have a letter from the Worldwide Church of God dated 1989, that God used dreams as a means of communication in the past and will do so again. Okay, now the Worldwide Church of God, after that letter came out, the only dreams that were ever acknowledged, the only dream I'm aware of was acknowledged, maybe there was more than one, was one from Loma Armstrong. But the church expected more dreams. Why? Probably based upon Acts chapter 2, which also talks about prophets as well. Now, many of you know, and I'm not going to go into all the detail about this, that I had a dream myself years ago. I was about 50 at the time, which makes me an old man, according to Numbers 8:25. And so that's consistent with, at the end times, old men having dreams. And I've told some people, I've told people about it, so I'm not going to go into any great depth here. I'll also comment that somebody who I didn't know in New Zealand, a few weeks prior to the formation of the Continuing Church of God, she had a dream. And basically, her dream showed something happening, and it showed that basically there'd be about 10 people from the New Zealand group that were going to break off and do something. And that happened about a month after she had her dream. It was a few days after the formation of the Continuing Church of God. So that happened. Now, you could say that I made up this dream stuff, but I didn't. We've got statements from her. And there's other people, which I'll get to in a moment, who had dreams as well. But one of the other ones that I wanted to mention was that back in Kenya, there was somebody by the name of Frederick Oshing, who's Evans Oshing's son, and he had a dream. And his dream basically, and I'm not going to go through all the details here because it'll just take too long. And I have articles at the COGwriter.com website about dreams. They've got all the details and all this. But basically, he had a dream that the work his father needed to leave where he was at and join Bob Thiel in order to do the work, get the work done. Now, when his father came with us, and also, by the way, sorry, I've interjected here again, he also saw part of New Zealand in the dream. Now, when he had this dream, he had no idea that we had a group in New Zealand, so that confirmed the dream. But I'll tell you a different type of confirmation. At the time, his father had about 260 people who was with him in the church that they were part of. And you say, well, okay, maybe 6 years later he would have had massive growth. Well, he'd been with that church for a long time, and no, they were not having growth particularly. Now, in Africa, we have about 14 times as many people as we did 6 years ago, which I believe, therefore, shows confirmation of the dream. Now, in Matthew 18, verse 16, you don't have to go there. Jesus says, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word may be established. And as it says in 1 Timothy 5:19, the Apostle Paul wrote, do not receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses. Well, we have had multiple dreams in multiple places in terms of witnesses regarding the Continuing Church of God and or myself. There are other dreams. As a matter of fact, I just found out somebody from India had a dream, 2 dreams actually, one telling him to keep the Sabbath, and the other one basically, he thinks, telling him that they should consider coming to be part of the Continuing Church of God. Oh, but I don't want to hear about dreams. You don't have to. Laodiceans and others discount scriptures about dreams. Now, I am unaware of any other Church of God where there have been multiple dreams that have come to pass related to them. Okay? You say, well, the old radio Church of God only had the one dream. Okay, fine. Well, perhaps people need more these days. Okay? The Radio Church of God grew into the Worldwide Church of God, became a very big organization. People saw this very big, so they were all excited. The size made them believe the dream. Our size has not fully made people believe the dream, but I'm going to explain something later that I think should get people to consider it further. Anyway, let's just talk about what some of the things have been going on with the Continuing Church of God. On December 30th or 31st, 2012, I wrote that I believed that the Continuing Church of God would reach more people in the first 30 days of its formation than any non-GTA group that came out of the old Worldwide Church of God. And that happened. And it wasn't that I had some particular plan. I just thought it was going to happen. And it turns out after I said this, 2 radio personalities contacted me. Now, yes, I had been on their programs before, but I had been on their programs regarding the Mayan calendar stuff, which was already over by this stage. And I ended up on there, and according to the low estimates of the people who would have listened, at least 2 million people heard me within that time period, and at least 100,000 people went to the COGwriter.com website. So we reached people, and so that particular proclamation success occurred. Something I said it was going to happen, and it did. But a lot of people don't have faith to believe. I want to go to Zechariah 4, verse 6. I've read this before. You don't have to go there, but the Bible says, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." That's how the work is going to get done. It says in 2 Corinthians 5:7, we're supposed to walk by faith, not by sight. And Habakkuk 1 verse 5 says, "Look among the nations and watch and be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, even if it were told to you." Now, while some people think that was for back then, that was also quoted in the New Testament, so I'm not going to go there. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which you've heard me cite many times if you've been watching our sermons throughout the years, says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, He'll direct your paths." Most will not do that. They will trust in their own understanding. But it says in the next verse, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." But the Laodiceans are wise in their own eyes. As far as the work and proclamation goal, we hit the proclamation goal. As far as just what is the work, Herbert Armstrong answered that question. He said, Christ said to his Philadelphia church era, because you have little strength, He would open these doors to us. The purpose which Christ built the church exemplifies the work. 1, to announce to the world the witness of the coming kingdom of God, and to prepare the people to whom God adds the church. God has always worked with humans. He has worked with one man at a time. The work consists of proclaiming the gospel by radio, television, and by print. So that's what he taught. And we've reached people in all around the world. We've actually reached people in at least 220 countries or territories that both YouTube and AW Stats have said, so people have seen our videos and read our articles and that kind of stuff. But we've done more than just that. We've also put out various literature. For example, we've put out the Bible News Prophecy magazine. We've put out 25 of them since our formation. This one is the 25th, which we just mailed out. It's the January 2019 edition, January-March edition. So we do put out printed literature, but we don't just limit it to English-speaking peoples. In Isaiah 32, verse 20, it says, "Blessed are you who sow beside all waters." Plant beside all waters, all oceans, all places. Now the magazine I just mentioned, our Bible News Prophecy magazine, has actually been produced in 15 languages. I want to read the list and then go and do something else in a moment. Of course, first it was in English, then it was in Spanish. I'm giving it the order that they came out. Third was Tagalog, which is a Filipino dialect. Fourth was Mandarin Chinese. Fifth was Kiswahili. And I told you about the guy from Tanzania who came And he basically came with us because this one person who cheated us got him to do some stuff, and it was kind of interesting. And by the way, he never cheated us. Then it got translated into German, then into Lulua, which is what many of our Kenyan members speak. Also in Russian, Hebrew, Hindi, Greek, Arabic, French, Chichewa, which is spoken in Malawi and parts of Mozambique, and then Ekagusi, which is also spoken, or predominantly spoken in Kenya, and I think parts of Uganda, maybe Lua there as well. So we didn't try to just limit it to the English language. As a matter of fact, I looked this up and added it all up. We've actually produced literature in 104 languages plus English. So it's 105 languages. The book that we have in the most languages is The Gospel of the Kingdom of God. Now, maybe there are other groups who've been producing as much materials, as many languages as we have. I'm unaware of that. Perhaps I think some, actually, one group, which I won't mention, after we put out our magazine in Kiswahili, then they put something out in Swahili, I think just because we had done it. But this is something we've done. Something else that we've done is we've produced literature. In terms of, in the last 6 years, we produced a lot of different booklets. Here's one. Here's our latest. Here's one on the Ten Commandments. Christians and Pastors of the Kingdom of God. One on the Holy Days. One on church history. A lot of people do not understand church history. A lot of people who profess Christ don't understand church history. If people actually understood church history, they would find that the early church was Church of God. It wasn't like the Eastern Orthodox, the Roman Catholics, or the Protestants. They're not going to find their religion at the early church, the way they could now do it. We also have others. Is God calling you? Where's the true Christian church today? Prayer. What's the Bible teach? Faith for those God has called and chosen. We even put a booklet out for dating, single people. And then this one, in a sense, can be one of the more fundamental ones. Is God's existence logical? Is there a God? Can you prove there's a God? And I believe that you can. So we have been putting out booklets and the magazines. We also put out the Study the Bible course. It's also online. I've been involved in baptizing people around the world. We've reached millions of people over radio. I mentioned the start of the old Radio Church of God. And the first time Herbert Armstrong did the Radio Church of God, he was on as a guest. Well, I've been on as a guest at least 120 times since the formation of the Continuing Church of God. In addition to that, we've had some others at least one from Europe and one from Africa, who've been on stations, other stations as well. We also have an online radio presence, so we've got our own Bible News Prophecy online radio. We also have something called Flipboard and some other Facebook presence. We also have an animations channel, reaching people that way. Now, when Herbert Armstrong was around, what he used to do, especially during the war days, the Second World War days, I should say which war we're talking about. He's been involved in many wars. He essentially would go to the radio station, grab the newspaper, and go through things that were going on there and discuss how they affected prophecy or what the Bible taught about those kind of things. And in modern times, although we'd have some of that is played over our Bible News Prophecy online radio. Most of you are aware they also maintain the COGwriter.com website. At the COGwriter.com website, we average at least 3 posts a day on doctrinal, news, and prophetic matters. So we're kind of doing something similar to what Herbert Armstrong did, but do it in a different way. Because nowadays, we have the new technology called the internet. And Herbert Armstrong mentioned about new doors in television, and one of those would have to do with the internet. We'll get to that in a little bit later. Also, by doing what we're doing, in addition to fulfilling Matthew 24:14, or working to fulfill Matthew 24:14, as well as Matthew 28:19 through 20, we're also working on Mark 13:28 to 37. And I'm not going to read all of that to you, but basically what it says is Jesus is saying to watch world events and take heed because you don't know when the time is. And he said, whatever I say to you, what I say to you all, and that's to watch. Well, by reporting about world events and how they affect biblical doctrine or prophecy or whatever, or interpreted in light of the Bible, we're helping people watch. Paul said, how shall they call on him they haven't believed? This is in Romans 10. And how shall they believe in him who have not heard? How shall they hear without a preacher? So to help people watch, that's one of the reasons why, for example, we do the Bible News Prophecy videos each week, plus, of course, the posts at COG and other places that we do. Now, I mentioned our animation results. A particular critic looked at our public statistics on YouTube, and after we had our first one done, and he said, "This is a success," being very sarcastic, and they're making more. In John 7:24, Jesus said, "Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment." Well, as it turns out, one of our members worked with us on this and promoted for us, actually, a couple of our animations, and within about a month or so, they have 40,000 views. Now, other than that, if you go to them, it looks like we only had about 2,000 views. But this is something we had. But this person who judged us was not judging according to appearance. He was judging according to appearance and not with righteous judgment. He could have written and asked, and I would have told him stuff, but he didn't want to do that. Now, since 2002, I've been teaching or urging, this is my old church organization, but explaining that Matthew 24:14 is going to be fulfilled partially through the attention of outside media. And this is happening. In my 2015 sermon on the short work, I mentioned that the short work alluded to in Romans 9:28, as well as the fulfillment of Matthew 24:14, would partially happen as a result of media attention. Now, while it's not time for the final fulfillment of Matthew 24:14 or Romans 9:28, we have gotten media attention. When we first started out, by the way, we were getting actually a lot of media attention from Chinese media. Now, people in the United States don't seem to particularly care, but we were getting lots of tens of thousands of views and stuff. We were getting all kinds of web views from China, because Chinese media paid attention for a while. But we've also had attention for other media. For example, the UK Express ran 3 articles that mentioned me by name in April of 2018. Now, they were not flattering articles. And they actually showed Bible News Prophecy video or two. And however, those views wouldn't be counted again by YouTube as well. And I don't know how many of those there were. But what was interesting about this is I wrote the person a couple of times when he mentioned us and said, "Hey, if you want some assistance on prophetic matters, let me know." Now, I didn't hear anything from this person until the day before yesterday. I got an email from him. So it's now December 22nd, 2019 as I do this. And I hadn't heard anything from this person. He never responded to my April emails, but he asked my prophetic information. He asked for my prophetic advice on certain astronomical event that's going to happen next week, and I provided it to him. Now, whether he's going to use it or not, I don't know. But it was interesting to me, he remembered. Okay, so despite the fact that perhaps he was making fun of us or just trying to get ratings or clicks on their articles, and I'm sure that's something that they've tried to do, he still remembered. The same thing with some others. Now, in Matthew 5:11, Jesus said, "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things falsely against you for my name's sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is the reward, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And I mentioned this scripture before. And it wasn't that the UK Express said evil things about us, but they were not particularly flattering. But that wasn't the only media attention that we've gotten. In late November of 2018, we did a video that I did called Pesco and the Great European Army. It didn't have that many views at the time, but as of now it's probably at around 800 or 900 views. And then first week of December, I think it had maybe 500 or 600 views. Well, as it turns out, somebody else took that, and they took 5 minutes of that particular video. That was the focus of their short video. They did a 12-minute video. 5 minutes was me speaking. And the other parts were basically to get to what I was going to say. And I looked this morning, and 295,000 people have seen that, have viewed that. So we've got to reach a lot of people in ways that we would not necessarily have thought about. In addition to this, someone asked me on December 10th if they could use our December 10th video called Sanhedrin Makes Burnt Offering to Dedicate the Altar. And I told this person that she could do so. Now, we've had just under 2,000 views of that on YouTube. When I looked this morning, it was 1,800, 1,900. I forgot the exact amount. But this gal, and we're the first, this was the first part of her video, has had 22,000 views since then. So we've had 22,000 views more than people would have thought. You know, we can document more than 1.4 million views now of our videos. And according to YouTube statistics, we've averaged over 4,000 views of our videos per week. Now, I know when you look at it, it looks like a few hundred here, a few hundred there. But according to YouTube statistics, in the last 12 months, because I just divided it and did this yesterday, we've averaged over 4,000 a week. Now, if you add the views that we had from the Pesco one, and the views we had from the Sanhedrin, and the Facebook one that we had just as last month of 20,000 up to 40,000, well, for the last 4 weeks, we've actually been averaging 88,000 views of our videos. Now, again, you look at YouTube statistics, it doesn't look like that. But the reality is, the vision that I've laid out since 2002 to Church of God leaders, and here, as I mentioned again in 2015, is that it's going to be media that's going to do this. Now, in the past, I remember communicating with people who contact me from small groups. And I said to them, look, you're not working on fulfilling Matthew 24:14. You have no clout. You're not doing anything. And they complained. They said, well, we just don't have any money. That's why we can't do it. The bigger organizations, they have the money. And I said, well, you got to get your priorities straight. Now, in our case, we said we were going to do it without the money. And I'll get to the money and size in just a moment. But God has blessed us. And we've reached more than other people have. And again, by trying to do things God's way, striving to do things God's way. Now, I'm aware that some of what we do is pretty tough. And what I mean by that is that we're now in a situation where less and less in the mainstream is going to be willing to cover us. We've gotten to a situation now where the mainstream shies away from anything that's considered biblically related content. And they don't like people who stand up for biblical morality, particularly sexual morality. So this is creating a problem for us in that we've got to look a bit more toward what you'll call alternative media. Now, you can go to the book of Matthew. You don't have to go there, but Matthew 9, 10, and 11, Jesus was, people said, you hung around with sinners and various ones. But he defended himself in Matthew 9, 12, and 13. But he did that. We sometimes are going to go out and deal with media people who we don't agree with. As a matter of fact, I don't know that there's any of the media people we would have 100% agreement with. Now, there may be some media people in the Church of God we just don't know. But whether we do mainstream media or alternative media, we're going to run into people who don't accept everything that we have to say. But we need to judge righteously. But people have improperly dismissed the continuing Church of God. Now, one of the things that has happened is that we have grown. And we've grown in ways that people had not expected, in ways I hadn't really planned on doing it either. Now, in terms of growth, let me read something that Jesus said. This is recorded in Matthew chapter 7. And I ask you to please go here. This is something that a lot of people just haven't really grasped this. Verse 15, he says, beware of false prophets. Now people, because of that, they think they should ignore all prophets. And he says they come in sheep's clothing, but they're ravenous wolves. You'll know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but bad tree bears bad fruit. Good tree can't bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. And I would suggest these booklets, for example, as proof that we're bearing good fruit and we're teaching what you would expect. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. So Jesus said that it's from the fruits is how you know a true from a false prophet. Well, good trees produce a lot of fruit. And in Deuteronomy 7:13, it refers to people as fruit of the womb. Now, fruits can be identified as people in the Church of God. Then the continuing Church of God over the last 6 years has those. Since we formed, we have produced the most fruit of that way of any what's considered ex-Worldwide Church of God group. We are the fourth largest, according to a couple different sources that I've seen. One had put us third, but that was an error. We're fourth. And while size is not an indicator necessarily of truth, the truth is we've been the fastest growing Church of God in the 21st century, whose leaders had any origins in the old Worldwide Church of God. Right now, there are 3,800. There's over 3,800 people who claim to be congregants of us, of the Continuing Church of God. Unlike the three groups that are bigger than us, who got the bulk of their membership from a split from another group, pretty much all at once. That's not what would happen with us. We started with 5 people on December 28th, 2012. Probably had a few dozen a year later. Okay. But now we've had such massive growth. And of the groups who were, again, part of the old Worldwide Church of God, or leaders were, the only one who's got the fruits of a prophet is the Continuing Church of God. Of course, Laodiceans and others, they refuse to accept that. They decide, or they reason around it. And that's actually what Laodicea means. They mean people decide or people judge. They use their criteria instead of the Bible's one. And, one of the complaints that people say, your growth doesn't count in the Continuing Church of God. Why? Because you mostly had growth through Africans. Well, the Jews pretty much thought this about the Christians. You have all this growth from Gentiles. So let's go to Galatians Chapter 3. There's a couple of verses I want to read there, and one in Romans we need to go over. Galatians 3, verse 27. Paul writes, for as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, neither is there slave nor free, neither is there male nor female. You're all one in Christ Jesus. And if you're in Christ, you're Abraham's seeds and heirs according to his promise. It doesn't matter if you're African or not. Now, I don't think Laodiceans and many others, critics, have understood properly Romans 11:25. I'm going to give you a moment to get there, even though it's just one verse, because I'm going to talk about it for another minute or two. Paul wrote, for I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion. And Laodiceans are wise in their own opinion. That blindness has happened to Israel, in part, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Till the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. I'd like to read something that people don't seem to remember who are part of the old Worldwide Church of God. Now, this came out in the Tomorrow's World magazine in September of 1971, so it's a long time ago. But Herbert Armstrong explained this verse, and I'd like to read his explanation. Now, study carefully, beginning in verse 25, he wrote, blindness in part has happened to Israel. How long? Forever? No. Note it. Until the fullness of the Gentiles has become in. The end of this age during which God is calling a people among the Gentiles to bear his name. Acts 15:14. And so, says Romans 11:26, all Israel shall be saved. How? As it is written, there shall come out of Zion a deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. The deliverer, Jesus Christ, is coming again. Again, I'm still reading from Herbert Armstrong. When he comes, the Gentile times will be over. The blindness will be removed from the Israelites, and their opportunity, their first chance of salvation, will then come to those God has blinded. This is the time when he comes to reign on his throne, the throne of David, with the saints, made immortal, reigning and ruling with him, and the time is during the 1,000 years. Now, Herbert Armstrong, again, he was referring to Romans 11. He says, notice verse 31. These blinded Israelites have not now in this age received mercy, that through the mercy of the Gentiles saved in this age, they may then obtain mercy and salvation. How? Because these saved Gentiles will then be kings and priests assisting in this wonderful work. End of quote from Herbert Armstrong. Clearly, we're a lot closer to the time when all the Gentiles are supposed to come in to later be kings and priests than when Herbert Armstrong wrote this. If you're in a Church of God other than the CCOG, the Continuing Church of God, does your church teach this? Do you understand this? Are you going to believe the Bible, or are you going to reason around it? More Gentiles had to be called, and that's happening now. Now, the end does not come until the gospel of the kingdom reaches enough nations, Matthew 24:14, and the full number of Gentiles, as the NIV, NLT, BSB, CEV, GNT, SCSV, ISV, and that Bible put Romans 11:25. All the full number of Gentiles God wants to come in this age comes in. It is not some negative that we have a bunch of Africans with us, and we've had this growth there. The full number of Gentiles had to come in. Now, it was not that I intentionally went out, by the way, to seek growth from Africa. Basically, what I did was put websites, articles, literature, sermons, and messages out to reach the world, Matthew 24:14 and 28:19 through 20. And African leaders contacted me. Now, if you're really praying for the kingdom to come, as Jesus said in Matthew 6:10, then you should be supporting Continuing Church of God. Don't let prejudices and factors stop you from acting on the truth. The truth is that the Continuing Church of God has been the fastest growing Church of God. Those leaders had origins in the old worldwide Church of God than any other group in the 21st century. You know, Laodiceans and others complained that my ordination as a prophet wasn't clear enough to them. Well, people had the same problem, by the way, with Moses, Jeremiah, Amos, John the Baptist, Jesus, and the Apostle Paul. So it's not a surprise that this problem exists today. Now, of the allegedly so-called 400 groups whose leaders were once part of the old worldwide Church of God, we're one of the newest and the fourth largest in terms of congregants. Of course, being large isn't what's important. Love, faithfulness, and truth are. Yet, Jesus said you'd know prophets by their fruit. And one of the fruits would be growth. And we've had that. You know, Herbert Armstrong, talking about the start of the old Radio Church of God, I'm looking at an article he wrote back, it was in the Good News magazine in June of 78, I think it was. He talked about how the church grew for 35 years, 30% per year, etc., etc. None of the other groups that I am aware of, whose leaders were part of the old worldwide Church of God, has such growth, or if they did, it stopped and they started to shrink. There are a couple of groups that were bigger than us a year or two ago who shrank. And we, on the other hand, went the other direction. You know, Laodiceans and others don't seem to appreciate that. They don't seem to think that it counts. Okay? You say, a bunch of groups have literature. Fine. Okay? A bunch of groups have magazines. Fine. We happen to have more languages, I think, but okay, fine. But the other groups have not had that type of growth. Consider that. You know, that was the sign that Jesus said to tell true from false prophets, was the fruits. Now, you can read through what Jesus wrote to Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea. Basically, he tells the people of Sardis that you've lost things and you don't get it. And he tells the Laodiceans, look, you think you've got it all and you don't know. You really don't have it. But that they thought that they did. Now, Jesus told various parables that he wanted people to bear fruit. And I'm just going to read Matthew 13, verse 28. He who receives seed on good ground is he who hears the word and understands it. He who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Now, one of the other complaints people have had about the Continuing Church of God is that, particularly in North America, is the lack of congregations in their area. I'd like to read Psalm 37, verse 4. It says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him." Sometimes Christians have to patiently wait. They need to have faith in God. You know, Jesus said in Luke 12, I'm going to read verses 31 and 32. "But seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you. Do not fear, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." If you're by yourself and we don't have a group in your area, don't be afraid of being alone. If you have to, God knows what you need, and he'll provide what you need. You know, Jesus said that Philadelphian Christians would be pillars in the temple of God in Revelation 3, verse 12. In this age, sometimes you, if you're not part of a regular congregation, or even if you're part of a really small one, you may need to be a pillar in your area. And perhaps things will grow in your area. And at minimum, though, try to at least attend the Feast of Tabernacles, because that way you can at least see people, run into people, etc. Now, I'm looking through my notes here, and I've got way more notes than I probably should cover here. So I'm going to kind of go through these. But we've restored a lot of truth in the Continuing Church of God. We teach things that the old Worldwide Radio Church of God teach. If you read our statement of beliefs, as far as I know, maybe there's somebody else who has done this, the 18 truths that Herbert Armstrong said that God led him to restore to the true church, those were actually in our statement of beliefs. You can read those and there's a link to them. Other groups don't have the right list, and they don't actually necessarily know what they are, or they won't teach all of it. Now, one criticism that we've had, and one person who left us, one excuse that they gave, and we do lose people from time to time, and we'll probably lose more, is that if you're a prophet, you should be prophesying all the time, making new prophecies and such that come to pass. Well, as far as prophetic teachings go, the Bible says that the prophets of old, they didn't just on their own come up with things, they spoke as God told them to speak. But let me comment about being a prophetic teacher. We have an article about the Laodicean church and the Laodicean church era, and I'm just looking at this, and in this there are at least 38 prophetic misunderstandings that the Laodicean and Sardis groups have, the non-Philadelphian groups have in prophecy. So what? Well, unless they change, most of these groups, or probably all these groups, will not know when the Great Tribulation is going to happen until it's too late. Wouldn't you expect that if God has a church of the prophet, they would fix errors in prophetic understanding? I urge you all, for example, if you're not part of the Continuing Church of God, to please read the article we have about who the man of sin is. Other Church of God groups that I'm aware of have it wrong. Interestingly, leaders from two of the larger Church of God groups, there's three larger than us, two of the leaders of two of the three have said that the Continuing Church of God actually has it right, and nobody else has it right, yet they haven't fixed it. In Proverbs 29, verse 18, it says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he who keeps the law, happy is he." We have the vision, and we are going through and explaining what should be done and how God's plan is going to work, based on the Bible. Do I believe that God leads me to have better understanding? Yes, but it's not because I'm seeing visions and having dreams all the time. It says I had some dreams. Again, you can read about those at the CCOG.com website, and you can watch a sermon about them. We've got a sermon about it as well. But based on understanding this, and not relying on traditions that don't always agree with the Bible. That's, I hope, is one of the clear fruits of the continuing Church of God. Now, as far as what's going on, we're seeing a lot of things happening in the world. We're seeing the mainstream media being less and less willing to allow views that support biblical ideas. As a matter of fact, I saw an article this week that said one website who claimed to have conservative content, whatever that might be, has experienced a 90% drop in visits because the algorithms that Google and YouTube and stuff have been using. And we've noticed this kind of thing, that type of persecution hitting us as well. But it's one of the reasons why we've been willing to look at alternative media, do radio interviews and radio stations that perhaps other people might not be willing to do. And as I said, even alternative media has picked up some of our stuff to preach it, to expand our reach. In terms of budgets, I mentioned that we're the fourth largest in terms of congregants, but in terms of budgets, that's not the case. The groups that are larger than us, from the published information that I've seen, they have a budget of, 50 to 100 times bigger than us. 50 to 100 times bigger. Yet they're not having this type of growth. They haven't had this type of growth. It isn't by money. And the two groups that are smaller than us, they're fifth and sixth on the list, have, at least 10 times, I think at least 10 times our income. It's not based upon money. There are hundreds of groups that claim to have origins in the old worldwide Church of God. They're not reaching the people. They don't put out the literature. They don't put out the depth of literature. They haven't restored certain things that we've done in the continuing Church of God. We've been striving to do what the Bible says. Whether this means teaching the book of Deuteronomy every 7 years at the Feast of Tabernacles, teaching everything that Jesus taught in the New Testament, correcting errors as we've seen them. We've also been trying to explain to people scriptures that people have overlooked. People have overlooked scriptures about dreams and prophets. People have overlooked scriptures about the Gentiles and the Africans. I still find it odd. So many people think the Africans don't count. But they do. We've had proclamation success. We've had growth. We've stood for biblical and doctrinal integrity. Can you see the hand of God in this? Do you accept that God can use prophets and use dreams? When you see the fruit and you see the growth. I'd like to read 1 Peter chapter 5, starting verse 6. If you can see the hand of God in this, consider what Peter wrote, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you." When my wife Joyce and I left our prior organization, we didn't know what was going to happen. And you see what's happened now. Jesus warned the bulk of Christians at the end time would be Laodiceans, and they wouldn't listen. So in the past 6 years, yes, I think we've demonstrated we have been listening to God, and we've been blessed by his grace. So what's ahead? Well, we expect to have more brethren in more places, more literature in more languages, more doctrinal clarifications, more prophetic clarifications, and doing some things that ultimately will result in the media, mainstream and or otherwise, promoting what we do to a degree that will lead to the fulfillment in God's eyes of Matthew 24:14. We expect to be the leader in terms of doctrinal understanding, historical documentation, and prophetic understandings. We still have a lot more to do, but I believe that we in the Continuing Church of God are leading the final phase of the work and believe that true Philadelphian Christians will be drawn to support what we do, and I hope that you're among them. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.